Hello, everybody, and welcome to my Secrets of Spoken English. I'm David Stig Hansen, and I created all the information in this presentation. The Secrets of Spoken English is something that I've been working on for more than 20 years. Actually, more about 18, and that's because when I came to Taiwan, I noticed that spoken English wasn't emphasized in the education system in the English as a Second Language programs that I had worked in. And up to now, they still aren't emphasized. Spoken English is not written English. When people try to say that it's less formal, I say yes, it is, because when we're speaking English, we're not as formal. There's one thing for my students who are mostly Taiwanese, but mostly Chinese speakers. When they think about spoken English or written English, one thing they forget is that there's the same grammar involved in both, which has something that Chinese doesn't have. They both have something in common that Chinese doesn't have. They have something Chinese doesn't use. Can you guess what it is that Chinese doesn't have? And there's several things I want to introduce to you that Chinese doesn't have. But the first and most simple part is auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verbs are something that we use in English, and other languages use them as well. We have a lot of tenses. We have what we call the times, and we have the forms, and that makes about 16 tenses. I don't always agree with everything I see. I grabbed that. Here's another thing that you have to consider. We have a lot of aspects and moods. For example, in the moods, there's indicative, subjunctive, imperative. The imperative mood is one of my secrets of spoken English. Another thing that people don't consider is the simple tense, the simple present, the simple past. Look at the rest. We have what's called an auxiliary verb or a helping verb here in this pattern. When we ask questions, we need them, and when we make negations, we need them. And in the simple present and the simple past, we don't have those, and that's something that needs to be considered. Again, the imperative mood is part of the simple present, and simple emphatic is another thing to consider. Where are the helping verbs for these two tenses? It's do or does and did. So it's used in the emphatic. I'll talk about that more later. But just now, I want you to understand that every sentence in English has a correlating auxiliary verb. Here's an example. Look at my sign, spoken English, written English. What's the main verb? Well, probably equal, right? So how do you negate equal? Can you say not? Is that possible? No, that's wrong. Where's your auxiliary verb? We need a helping verb here to negate every single sentence in English. The helping verb is very important. Every sentence has a correlating auxiliary verb, and if you want to speak better spoken English, you need to know that. Next is about these vocabulary books. I see a lot of students on buses. They look very scared and nervous. They're trying to get through the vocabulary book. And these words here seem like bankrupt is an important word. Do you need to use the word bankrupt as a student? There's so many words in English. These types of books aren't really good. How many words are there in English? If you check Wikipedia, it says there are about 250,000 words in English. And that's 250,000 words. Are you going to use these vocabulary books to learn 250,000? 250,000 words? I don't think so. Also, with the smartphones and modern communication technology, including the internet, it has eliminated the need for vocabulary books such as these anyways. I don't think you should waste your money on vocabulary books to learn all the words in English. Do you need to learn every single word in a language to use the language? Focus on the most common spoken phrases instead. I love this website. I'm not going to show it right now, but it's a great website. How many verbs are there in English? 1/7 of the words are verbs. And so 250,000 times 1/7 equals about 36,000. Are you going to use vocabulary books to learn 36,000 verbs? It doesn't matter how many verbs there are in English. You don't need to learn every word in English before mastering the grammar and being able to speak it. You shouldn't wait until you know everything about a car before you can drive it. You don't have to build a car. You don't have to know how to fix the car. You just need to know how to drive the car. And my argument is that we can use auxiliary verbs. How many verbs are there in English? There's 36,000 plus. But I say focus on the most common verbs. The most common English verbs, especially the most common ones, it boils down to the simple be, do, and have. these are not just main verbs, but they're also the most important auxiliary verbs, making them the most common verbs spoken. Be, have, and do are the three most common verbs in English, but they have something called conjugations. And each verb has a conjugation, and each verb has a root form, and the grammar, you have to understand how to use it. But I want you to keep it simple. Remember more about a helping verb. Auxiliary and helping verb is the same thing. We have something called subject-auxiliary inversion for questions in English. Also, the helping verb takes the negation. Therefore, the helping verb structure is very important in spoken and written English. All English statements and questions have a helping verb or a modal, and we'll talk about that. Here are the helping verbs. Here are some modals. The helping verbs also have the negation: isn't, aren't, wasn't, weren't, hasn't, hadn't. Don't forget the negative version of them. And the modals: shouldn't, couldn't, wouldn't. These are all the auxiliary verbs in English. Here are some contractional abbreviations that we do to words that are called contractions. And as you notice, the most common ones are helping verbs or even a modal or a helping verb. We can see all the contractions that are in the helping verb. There are more contractions, but this is in the pronoun helping verb pattern. A pronoun and a helping verb creates these basic contractions. And in the negative version, we have, of course, a helping verb and the word not, but nt, apostrophe nt, n apostrophe t, aren't, isn't. Do you know how to pronounce this? It's not won't. Don't say won't. This is weren't, weren't. That's a very important word in English. Do you ever use these words? If you're not using these words, here's three more: could have, would have, could have, should have, and also might have. These words are also very important. These are what I call the most important spoken words in English. The 48 words in spoken English you should be using. Most are contractions, and some are reductions. We're getting to my first secret in spoken English. Secret number 1 is contractions. Please don't separate your contractions when you're speaking. Now, not everything needs to be contracted. That's advanced work. But these words here should not be separated if you see them in a sentence. Most of these words are contractions. When you see this word, don't separate it. They are, no, there. Don't say they are, it's there. Could have, no, it's could have. So please make the contraction. When we speak, it's more natural. And reductions as well. These are also very important. Those three words, would have, could have, should have, those are contractions, but if we add the not, it's pronounced wouldn't have. And that's something we don't write, but it's always spoken. We always say wouldn't have or couldn't have. And wouldn't have, couldn't have, shouldn't have, mightn't have is another one. I think it's also important to note. I'll probably add that and make it 49. Might have. Should be here, might have. And then maybe 49 and 50, because mightn't have would be below it. Okay, so I'll change that later after I get $1 million. Secret number 3, questions. How to make questions is very important, and how to respond to questions. We basically have 2 ways to answer or respond to a question. And that is a yes-no question or a long answer question. And the structure: question, word, helping verb, subject, main verb, and something more after. It can be a long answer question or a WH question. Long answer question is a WH question. And a yes-no question is a short answer question. Helping verb, subject, main verb. Do you work? Why do you work? Now, when we ask the questions, we have about 7 different types of ways that we can ask a question. 2 types of responses, but 7 types of questions we might hear. And I talk about that in one of my other videos. All of these secrets are discussed in my other videos. How to answer the questions, how to respond to questions is important. I call it the art of the short answer. Quickly answer this question. Have you been to the US? Did you start to say because in your answer? That's Chinese English. Please don't answer a yes-no question with because. There's a big problem here. When you answer these questions, how do you answer them? Are you a student? What do you say? Do you have a job? What do you say? Have you been to the US? How do you respond? How about these answers? Are you a student? Yes, I am a student. Are you a student? No, I am not a student. Is that acceptable? Do you have a job? Yes, I have. Okay, there's a problem here that's different from the problem here. These are all wrong. Okay, now This top one I'll talk about later, but the middle one here, do you have a job? Yes, I have. You're using the main verb. Sometimes we see this in British English, and it is a contraction, I've, but in this case, the helping verb is do, not have. So when you say I have, it confuses the conversation, especially in California. Have you been to the U.S.? If you just say no, it doesn't really confirm you understood anything. So let's focus on the parts of the question. Are you a student? Yes, I am a student. Now, this is wrong because this is not a conversation. You're repeating each part of my question. And this is frustrating for me, the person asking you the question. If you answer like this, I want to kill you. So it's very frustrating for me. It doesn't confirm that you understood my question. And when you say yes or no instead of some other words, it's also kind of boring, and it doesn't confirm you understood the question. Here's a negative tag question. You aren't married, are you? If you say yes to this, are you saying, yes, you're right, I'm not married? Or are you saying, I'm not? So it's better to use two words, including the pronoun and the helping verb, I am. Are you a student? I am. Are you a student? I'm not. This confirms you understood my question very clearly. And it really, really makes the conversation go better. If you always just say yes or no, it's boring. So use the two-word rule. And I'll tell you about this two-word rule later in my videos. So here are better answers. Are you a student? I am. Are you a student? I'm not. I'm a teacher. Do you have a job? I do. Focus on the helping verb, not the main verb. Have you been to the U.S.? I haven't. This now is the helping verb, so you can use it in your answer. And secret number 5, some grammar, the simple tense. The simple tense is a big problem for most of my Chinese speakers. This includes the simple present and the simple past. It's the two verbs that don't have helping verbs shown in the affirmative statement, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Simple present has the helping verbs do or does and don't and doesn't. But there's also some difference between the first, well, I'll tell you in a minute, but third person singular is one of my students' biggest problems. Here's some examples. I, they, we do camp. He, she, it camps. Okay, and as far as he, she, it doesn't camp, I don't camp. Those are the differences, and most of my students ignore this. Now here's the structure I want to talk about next. Okay, as you can see, we have a chart here showing all those contractions that I presented to you earlier. We have the affirmatives and we have the negatives. And in the most of the families here, we have affirmative contractions like you are, you have, you had, or you would changes to you're, or you've, or you'd. And these are the contraction families affirmative. But what about the do family? See, this is the simple tense. This is the simple present. And of course, the simple past is didn't. So we also had simple tense. We have do, doesn't, and don't, doesn't, and didn't. But we don't have any contractions here. And the question is, why not? And it's because the simple tense isn't so simple. In fact, we need to conjugate the main verb. So there aren't any affirmative contractions. And when we do that, I want to show you the trick. I, you, we, they, of course, has a first person singular, second person singular, or a second person plural. We is the first person plural, and they is the third person plural. Those go with the verb root. Very easy. But in this case, the third person singular, he, she, or it, must change. And that's called the third person singular grammar issue that most of my students. Also, another problem is the emphatic and how to use it. He, she, it goes, but we would say he does go if we want to use emphatic, and then he does go. Well, this says work. Okay, he works. Now, if we're going to use the emphatic, we'll say he does work. And when we say he does work, then that means we're using it in a special way. You really shouldn't use this special way unless you understand. So don't say, hi, David, my brother works. Okay, don't say, my brother does work. Pushing, why are you using emphatic when there's nothing to emphasize? An emphatic situation, we say, my sister doesn't work, my mother doesn't work, but my brother and father do work. Or my brother does work. And that way we emphasize. And we don't even need the main verb. We can say, my brother does. Okay, I just want to keep moving here. The simple past is exactly the same problem, except we don't have a third-person singular issue anymore. Everything's the same. No third-person singular. He, she, it, camped. I, you, they, camped. So that's easy, but remember there's the emphatic problem still. Don't say, hi, David, yesterday I did work. No, you should say, yesterday I worked. And if you use the emphatic, you have to understand how to do it. David, yesterday my sister didn't work and my brother didn't work, but I did. Or, but I did work. We emphasize it. It's kind of special. Secret number 6. Secret number 6 is what I'm calling the imperative. Now, actually, maybe I can put the imperative together with the simple tense, because the imperative also follows the rules of the simple tense, but just taking away one thing. Is this correct? You can sit down. Okay, if you're inviting me to sit down, don't tell me I can sit down. Doya, I have a butt. I know I can sit down. It's very big. I know how to sit. So don't tell me I have the ability to sit down. If you tell me I can do something, you're confirming that I have an ability to do it. So instead, just say sit down. Don't use the you. If you want to be more polite, you can say please sit down. This is called the imperative mood. And this is my 6th secret, because we spend so much time using the imperative mood in English, giving commands, giving instructions, giving directions, telling people what to do. This guy, he was giving a lot of commands, giving instructions, tell someone how to put something together, how to do something, how to go somewhere. We use the affirmative imperative, or we can also use a negative imperative, also called the prohibited mood. Okay, don't. And it always uses the word don't, except if you use an imperative plural situation, we say let's not do it, let's not walk. But if you're telling somebody not to do it, we say, hey, don't walk. And we use it all the time. In fact, it's some of the most common, these are the most common imperative phrases in English, right here. I found them on the internet. I also made some, this woman, she takes care of her children and she gives them commands all day long. And here's some more. Don't worry if I'm going too fast. I have a video on imperatives. Just find it and watch it. Prohibitions, we see them all the time. Warnings, we use the imperative. Requests, we use the imperative. Calls for action in advertising, sales uses the imperative. Being polite, we use it a lot. Check out my video giving instructions, how to do things. These are the instructions for imperative situations. Giving directions, it's very important in English, so it's one of my secrets. How do you give directions in English? Secret number 7, it's going to be something that also Chinese doesn't really have, and that's the second condition. Here are 2 sentences. When it rains, I'll get wet. When it doesn't rain, it won't get wet. That's the first. Second is, if it rained, it'd get wet. If it didn't rain, I wouldn't get wet. That's the second. And the question I ask everybody is, which one of these is the past? And people choose the second, but the truth is neither are the past. I got to make that bigger, right? Neither are the past. Neither are the past. What does that mean? In English, that means that there's a special use for the second condition. This is the second condition. And what is the difference between the first condition and the second condition? I talk about that in my 7th video. What you really need to know is that the person making the statement is thinking something. They're thinking that the situation they're talking about is real or hypothetical. That's the second condition. This is a hypothetical situation right here, okay? If it didn't rain, it wouldn't get wet, but it's going to rain. In my mind, it's hypothetical. Now, that's the second condition, and the second condition is talking about now. It's not the past. It's now or the future. So what about the third condition? That's the past. Changing the past is impossible. So when we use the third condition, we do it to talk about maybe regrets or other alternative outcomes. Here's a third condition situation. I left my bike outside. It was stolen. I left my bike outside and it was stolen, so I regret this. And therefore, I make a third conditional statement like this. If I hadn't left my bike outside, it wouldn't have been stolen. Or maybe my mother says this to me. If you hadn't left it outside, it wouldn't have been stolen. Now, the conditions, all conditions, we have not just we don't just have the second and the third condition, but we also even have the first and a zero condition. So conditions have several conditions, the conditional grammar have about 4 different areas. And what you can see here is when you have the zero in the first, we can use when. When it rains, things get wet. When it rains, you'll get wet. That's the first and zero. The reason why is because it's a real situation. But in the second and third, we cannot use when. The reason why is because it's a hypothetical situation. Remember what I told you earlier, there's real and there's hypothetical. And in the past, the third condition, we're talking about regrets, we can use the hypothetical. Let's take a look at some other things about the conditions. When you're using the condition, remember the zero condition always happens, and it's something we use with the simple present grammar again. Simple present grammar appears so much in English structure that it's very, very complex in a way. But in the zero condition, it's what happens. For example, if you boil water, if you heat water to 100 degrees Celsius, it boils. This is something that always happens. And we can talk about ourselves. Every Sunday I read. Don't say every Sunday morning I will read. That's something where we talk about more of a, first of all, let's look at it. This is now in the future, and this is the past. So now in the future, why? Because on this side it's real, and on this side it's conditionally hypothetical. Also, what I was talking about earlier is we use the zero condition when we state facts, such as ice melts at, I forgot, 1 degree Celsius, or 33 degrees Fahrenheit. And with the first, we state consequences. So don't say, every Sunday I will read. No, why are you stating it like a consequence? Just say the zero. Every Sunday I read. Every Sunday morning I wake up and read. But first is, if it rains, you'll get wet. That's a consequence. And we use it to talk about the future in more of a consequential manner. Then in the second condition, we state hypothetical future possibilities. I used to say things that were improbable, but now I realize that we use it so much. We use the second condition a lot in English, and the reason why is because we're always talking about different possibilities. Do you want to go to the mountains today, or do you want to go to the ocean today? Well, the mountains would be cold. The ocean would be wet. The mountains would have snow. The ocean would have sharks. Okay, do we want to go to the expensive restaurant, or do we want to go to the cheap restaurant? Well, the expensive restaurant would be more delicious, and the expensive restaurant would be more comfortable. The cheap restaurant would be cheaper, and the cheap restaurant would be faster, and the cheap restaurant would be quicker and more efficient. There's a lot of situations we use the second condition. So don't look at this and say, oh, I don't care about that, because you're making a big mistake if you want to speak good English. And the third condition is as well. We always talk about hypothetical alternative results in English. And when you ignore these two, you ignore a big part of English. We create questions, and we use the main clause. I changed it. Now the if is second, and the result clause is first. And this one here, the if clause is first, the result clause is second, and we have a comma. But here, the result clause is first. Things get wet if it rains. Things don't get wet when it doesn't rain. If we're going to make questions, we use it for the main clause, like here, yes, no questions, and WH questions. I want to finish this video very quickly. It's already 26 minutes. But we also, if we're answering these types of questions, don't repeat the if clause. We often don't even say the if clause in many of these situations. Answering these questions, just focus on the result. Mixed conditions. The last thing I want to say about this is, we're almost finished here. We have mixed conditions. If it had rained, you would be wet right now. Okay. If it had rained, you'd be wet. Or if it had rained yesterday, you'd be wet right now. So we can mix a condition, and we also can do it the other way. If you didn't live across the hall, you couldn't have met Sheldon. Okay, that's the opposite, but what is that possible? It seems impossible, but the idea is if you didn't live across the hall in the past up until now, so we use the shenza, the right now grammar, then we change it. So it's almost like this. It's actually incorrect grammar, but we always hear it. Here's another example. If it weren't for him, you would have never met the other guy. Okay, if it weren't for him is here, the second condition. And that's if it weren't for him now and in the past. And what you need to know about conditional situations is it's about one third of the spoken English structure. We're always using the second and third conditional. So you can't ignore it. Those are my 8 secrets of spoken English. And there will be links to all of these different presentations for each one, I guess below, or I'll put up some annotations, but they'll be easy to find. You can search them on my channel. And thank you for watching. Hope this wasn't too long and boring. Have a great day.